The air in our kitchen on that Sunday afternoon was thick enough to taste a heavy stew of roasting chicken, garlic, and the sharp, metallic scent of my father's simmering anger. I was 16, and the world felt like a fragile soap bubble in my hands, beautiful and terrifyingly temporary. Sunlight, the color of warm honey, streamed through the big window over the sink, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. I could feel the cool, smooth ceramic of the plate I was drying, a familiar comfort against my fingertips. My mother, Elena, hummed a soft, tuneless melody as she basted the chicken, her movements a fluid, practiced dance. The sound of the sizzling fat hitting the pan was a percussive accompaniment to her tune. She was the peacemaker, the quiet center of our family's storm, her presence a constant, gentle pressure that kept my father's tempest from tearing the house apart. My little brother, Leo, who was 10, sat at the kitchen table, his small brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully colored a dinosaur with a bright purple crayon. The waxy smell of the crayons mixed with the aroma of the food, creating a strangely comforting childhood perfume. The scratch of his crayon on the paper was a soft, rhythmic sound. And then there was my father, Antonio. He sat at the head of the table, his large, calloused hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee. He was a monument of a man, carved from granite and silence. His presence filled the room, pushing against the walls. He was reading the newspaper, the crisp rustle of the pages sounding like distant gunfire every time he turned one. I could feel his eyes on me, a physical weight, even though I wasn't looking at him. I knew that look. It was the look that preceded a lesson, the kind that left bruises on your spirit. My crime, it turned out, was my report card, which lay on the table between the salt and pepper shakers like a piece of damning evidence. I had gotten a C in Mr. Henderson's history class. Just one C, nestled amongst a row of B's and a single, shining A in English literature. My father's voice, when it came, was deceptively calm, a low rumble like thunder on a far-off horizon. "Maya," he said, not looking up from his paper. "Come here." The plate in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I placed it carefully on the counter, the clink of it against the granite unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. My mother stopped humming. Leo's crayon stilled. I walked the 5 steps to the table, my socks whispering on the cool tile floor. I could feel my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He finally lowered the newspaper, his dark eyes pinning me in place. He tapped a thick, work-roughened finger on the offending C. "Explain this." My mouth went dry. "It's just one C, Dad. Mr. Henderson's tests are really—" "One C," he interrupted, his voice beginning to sharpen. "One C is a crack in the foundation, Maya. One C says you're lazy. That you don't care." He leaned forward, and I could smell the coffee on his breath, see the deep lines of disappointment etched around his mouth. Do you know what I was doing when I was 16? I was working 2 jobs. I was carrying bricks for my uncle's construction company until my hands bled, so I could put food on my family's table. I didn't have the luxury of coming home to a warm house and bringing home this. He flicked the report card with his finger, a dismissive, contemptuous gesture that made me flinch. Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, hot and shameful. "I'm not lazy. I studied for that final for 2 weeks. I have a hard time with dates and names. It doesn't stick. Things don't stick because you don't make them stick." His voice rose, filling the kitchen, bouncing off the cabinets. The sound was so loud it felt like a physical blow. Leo shrank in his chair, his small shoulders hunching. "You're smart, Maya, but you have no discipline. No grit. You think the world is going to hand you things because you're pretty and you can write a nice poem? The world doesn't care about your poems." Each word was a lash, stripping away a layer of my self-esteem. I could feel the heat of a furious, helpless blush spreading up my neck and across my cheeks. My mother placed a gentle hand on my father's arm. "Antonio, por favor. It's 1 grade. She's a good student." He shook her hand off, not roughly, but with a finality that silenced her. "A good student doesn't get C's, Elena. A good student strives for excellence in everything. This," he said, picking up the report card and holding it aloft as if showing it to an invisible jury, "this is mediocrity. And in this family, we are not mediocre." He stood up then, his chair scraping harshly against the tile. He loomed over me, a giant casting a long, cold shadow. "You will go to your room. You will not use your phone, you will not listen to music. You will open your history book and you will not close it until you can recite every chapter backwards. Is that understood?" The humiliation was a live wire in my chest, sparking and dangerous. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to tell him that my A in English was worth 1,000 of his beloved, perfect A's in math, because it came from my soul. But I didn't. I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. "Look at me," he commanded. I forced my eyes to meet his. They were hard, like chips of flint. "I am doing this because I love you. Because I don't want you to end up a failure. One day, you will thank me for this. He would never know how deeply I doubted that. I turned and fled the kitchen, the sound of his judgment and the smell of that perfect, uneaten roast chicken chasing me up the stairs. I didn't go to my room. I went to the one place that had always been my sanctuary, my grandfather's old study at the end of the hall. The room smelled of old books, lemon polish, and faintly, of my grandfather's pipe tobacco, a scent that lingered like a friendly ghost. A soft, gray light filtered through the slats of the blinds, painting stripes across the worn Persian rug. I sank into his old leather armchair, the cool, cracked leather sighing under my weight. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapped my arms around them, and let the hot, silent tears finally fall. They dripped onto my jeans, leaving dark, circular stains. The house below me was silent again, the storm having passed, leaving only wreckage in its wake. Downstairs, I knew my mother was quietly serving the food, and my father was eating in stern, self-righteous silence, and Leo was probably pushing his peas around his plate, the joy of his purple dinosaur utterly forgotten. I stayed there for a long time, listening to the steady tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the corner, a sound that was both a comfort and a reminder that time was passing, and that this pain, like all others, was supposed to eventually fade. Continua a história. Weeks bled into months, and the sharp sting of that Sunday afternoon dulled into a persistent, low-grade ache. A cold war had settled over our household. My father and I moved around each other like opposing planets, our orbits careful, our interactions reduced to polite, necessary exchanges. I buried myself in my books, in my writing, building fortress walls of words to keep his disapproval out. I made sure my grades were impeccable, a row of A's that I presented to him without a word, a silent rebellion of perfection. He would glance at them, give a curt nod, and hand them back. No praise. No acknowledgement. The lesson, it seemed, was eternal vigilance, not celebration. It was on a crisp Tuesday in early March, the kind of day where the air smells of wet earth and the promise of spring, that the envelope arrived. The mailman's footsteps on our front porch were a familiar, midday sound. I was the one who fetched the mail, more out of habit than anything else. The metal mailbox was cold against my fingers. I pulled out the usual stack of bills, flyers, and a few magazines. And then I saw it. A thick, cream-colored envelope, heavy with importance. It was addressed to my father, Antonio Silva, in elegant, embossed script. In the upper left-hand corner was the name and logo of the Monte Vista Literary Review, one of the most prestigious literary magazines in the country. My breath caught in my throat. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, a frantic, wild bird. I knew, with a certainty that felt like fate, what this was. I had submitted a short story to their annual Young Writers Contest 3 months ago, under a pen name I had invented, a secret I had kept locked tight in my journal. I had used my father's name as the return address, a practical decision at the time, as I didn't want my mother to accidentally open it and spoil the surprise if I actually won something. I never imagined I would. I stood frozen on the porch, the cold seeping through my socks. The rest of the mail felt flimsy and insignificant in my hands. This envelope was real. It was heavy. It had weight. I turned it over and over, my fingers tracing the raised lettering of the Monte Vista seal. This was it. My validation. My proof that my words, my silly poems and stories, mattered. That they were not a sign of mediocrity, but of something else entirely. A plan, reckless and brilliant, began to form in my mind. I wouldn't open it. I would give it to him, unopened. I would watch him open it. I would let him read the words meant for me, and I would see the confusion, and then the dawning realization, on his face. It was a cruel sort of theater, I knew, but after the public humiliation in the kitchen, it felt like a kind of justice. That evening, the house was quiet. My mother was working a late shift at the hospital. Leo was at a friend's house. My father was in his recliner in the living room, watching the news. The blue-gray light from the television flickered across his face, painting him in shades of shadow and pallor. The room smelled of the lemon-scented wood cleaner my mother used and the faint, musky scent of my father's aftershave. I walked into the room, my bare feet silent on the plush carpet. The heavy envelope felt like a lead weight in my hand. My father glanced up, his expression neutral, expectant. "The mail came," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "There's something for you. It looks important." I held it out. He muted the television, the sudden silence feeling loud and profound. He took the envelope from me, his brow furrowing slightly as he felt its weight. He turned it over, examined the return address. I saw no recognition in his eyes. "Monte Vista Literary Review," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "What is this?" "I don't know," I lied, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. "Open it." He reached for the letter opener on the side table, a sharp, silver blade shaped like a miniature sword. The sound of the envelope being slit open was a sharp, decisive rip in the quiet room. He pulled out a sheaf of papers. There was a cover letter on top, and beneath it, I could see the first page of my story, the title I had labored over for weeks staring back at me, The Keeper of Lost Things. He began to read the letter aloud, his voice a low, confused monotone. Dear Mr. Silva, we are writing to inform you that the submission under the pen name Alara Vance, for which you are listed as the correspondent, has been awarded the first place prize in our annual Young Writers competition. He stopped. His eyes scanned the page again, then lifted to meet mine. The confusion in them was deep, utter. Alara Vance, he said. What is this? Is this some kind of joke? My mouth was dry as dust. Keep reading, I whispered. He looked back down at the letter. The story, The Keeper of Lost Things, was unanimously selected by our panel for its remarkable emotional depth, its lyrical prose, and its unique narrative voice. We were particularly struck by its exploration of memory and forgiveness within a family context. His voice trailed off. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the page. I could see the gears turning in his head, slowly, laboriously. The pen name. The subject of the story. The return address. The pieces were all there, laid out before him. Then, his eyes flickered to the manuscript itself. He began to read the first paragraph, then the second. I saw his knuckles whiten as he gripped the paper. I saw the blood drain from his face. He was reading a story about a young girl and her stern, distant father, a man who valued bricks and mortar over the fragile architecture of his daughter's heart. He was reading about the Sunday afternoon humiliations, the silent dinners, the feeling of never being quite good enough. He was reading his own life, reflected back at him through my words. He didn't look up. He read the entire first page, then slowly, deliberately, set the papers down on his lap. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture of such profound and sudden weariness that he seemed to age 10 years in front of me. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the frantic beating of my own heart. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were different. The Flynn was gone, replaced by something raw, something wounded and unbearably vulnerable. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He just stared at me, and in that endless, silent moment, I saw the fortress walls of his certainty crumble into dust. Continua a história. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any of his shouted lectures had ever been. It was a living thing, filling the space between us, thick with unspoken words and shattered perceptions. He just sat there, the winning letter and the first page of my story resting on his knees, his large, work-roughened hands lying limp and still on top of them. He looked from the papers to my face, and then back again, as if trying to reconcile two incompatible realities. Alara Vance, he finally said, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. I nodded, unable to speak. The triumph I had imagined feeling in this moment was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was only a terrifying, yawning chasm of exposure. He had seen the most secret, vulnerable parts of me, the parts one hid behind a facade of good grades and quiet obedience. He picked up the manuscript again, his movements slow, almost reverent. He didn't read it aloud. His eyes scanned the lines, and I knew he was absorbing every word, every carefully chosen metaphor for his own coldness. I saw him flinch when he reached a particular passage where the girl in the story describes her father's voice as the sound of winter, sharp and barren, killing all the fragile, growing things inside her. I saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. He read for what felt like an eternity. When he was finished, he carefully placed the pages back into the cream-colored envelope, his movements precise, almost ritualistic. He stood up from his recliner, the old leather groaning in protest. He seemed smaller somehow, as if the act of reading my story had physically diminished him. Maya, he began, his voice cracking on the second syllable of my name. He cleared his throat, tried again. I need to take a walk. He didn't wait for a response. He just turned and walked out of the living room. I heard the soft click of the front door opening and closing, and then he was gone. The house was suddenly, oppressively empty. I sank onto the sofa, my legs unable to hold me. The flickering blue light from the muted television cast dancing shadows around the room, but it felt eerie now, not cozy. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I had wanted him to see, to understand. But I hadn't anticipated the cost of that understanding, the naked pain in his eyes. I had wounded my father, not with a shout, but with a whisper. And I had no idea if the damage could ever be repaired. He was gone for over an hour. I sat in the growing darkness, not moving, barely breathing, listening to the grandfather clock in the hall tick away the seconds. Each tick was a question. What was he thinking? Was he angry? Ashamed? Was he walking through our quiet suburban streets, seeing the lit windows of other families, wondering what secrets they held behind their own closed doors? When the front door finally opened again, the sound was soft, hesitant. His footsteps in the hallway were slow and heavy. He came back into the living room but didn't turn on the light. He stood by the doorway, a tall silhouette against the faint glow from the street lamp outside. He didn't speak for a long time. I could hear his breathing, a little ragged, as if he had been walking fast. The scent of the cool night air clung to his jacket, a clean, sharp smell that cut through the stuffy indoor air. "I walked to the park," he said, his voice low and measured, as if he were choosing each word with immense care. "I sat on our bench. The one we used to go to when you were little, to feed the ducks." I remembered that bench. The feel of the warm, splintery wood under my legs. The smell of the pond water and the sound of the ducks quacking. I remembered sitting on his shoulders, feeling like I was on top of the world. "I read your story," he continued. "The whole thing. Sitting there in the dark." He took a step further into the room. "I read about the father. My God, Maya. Is that really how you see me?" There was no accusation in his tone. Only a desperate, heartbreaking need to know. Tears welled in my eyes, blurring his silhouette. "It's how you made me feel, Dad. That Sunday with the report card, you made me feel like I was nothing. Like the things I loved were worthless." He was silent again, absorbing the blow. I heard him take a deep, shuddering breath. "I thought I was making you strong," he whispered, the words filled with a dawning, horrific regret. "My father, he was a hard man. Life was a battle for him, and he taught me that the only way to survive was to be harder than the world that was trying to break you. He never praised me. He only pointed out my failures. I thought that was how you built character. I thought if I made you tough, you would be ready for anything." He moved then, coming to sit in his recliner again, facing me. In the dim light, I could see the tracks of tears on his own cheeks, glistening faintly. The sight was so shocking, so utterly foreign, that it stole the breath from my lungs. I had never seen my father cry. Not when his own father died, not when he lost his job for 6 months years ago. He was a man carved from stone. But now, the stone was weeping. "I was so proud of those calluses," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The ones I got from carrying bricks. I thought they were a badge of honor. I wanted to give you calluses on your spirit. I thought I was protecting you." He gestured weakly toward the envelope on the table. "But you built something so much more beautiful. You didn't build walls. You built a whole world. With words. And I was too blind, too stubborn, to see it. I was so busy trying to make you strong that I forgot to make you feel loved." The dam inside me broke. A sob escaped my throat, loud and ragged in the quiet room. All the anger, the resentment, the years of feeling unseen, began to melt away under the scalding truth of his regret. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Your words, Maya, they are not mediocre. They are a miracle. That story, it broke my heart. But it also put it back together again, I think. In a different way." He shook his head, a look of awe on his face. "First place. A national competition. My daughter." He said the words, "my daughter," not with ownership, but with a reverence I had never heard from him before. "I am so sorry, Maya," he said, and the apology was simple, direct, and utterly devastating in its sincerity. "I am so sorry for every time I made you feel small. For every time I didn't see the incredible person you are becoming. Is there any way you can ever forgive me?" I didn't answer with words. I got up from the sofa, crossed the room, and knelt in front of his chair. I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders and buried my face in the rough fabric of his jacket. He smelled of night air and Old Spice and, faintly, of tears. For a moment, he was stiff, surprised. Then, his arms came around me, tentatively at first, and then with a crushing, desperate strength. He held me like he was holding onto a lifeline, his big body shaking with silent sobs. We stayed like that for a long time, in the dark living room, father and daughter, finally finding a common language in the ruins of our old war. Continua a história. The change in our house did not happen overnight, but it began that evening, in the quiet darkness of the living room. It was a subtle shift, like the changing of a season, felt first in the quality of the air and the tone of the silence. The Cold War was over. In its place was a fragile, tentative peace, built on a foundation of painful honesty and a shared, raw vulnerability. The next morning, I came down for breakfast to find my father already at the kitchen table. The cream-colored envelope from the Monte Vista Literary Review was placed squarely in the center, like a centerpiece. He looked up from his coffee as I entered, and his eyes, which for so long had held only judgment, now held a new, unfamiliar emotion, a kind of shy, proud awe. "Good morning," he said, his voice softer than its usual morning gravel. "Morning," I replied, cautiously, moving to get a bowl for my cereal. He gestured to the envelope. This is an incredible thing, Maya. Truly. Your mother and I, we need to celebrate this properly." And celebrate we did. That weekend, my mother, her eyes shining with tears of joy and relief, made my favorite meal, lasagna, with her famous garlic bread, and we had a proper celebration. Leo, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, was buoyant and silly, making everyone laugh. My father didn't give a speech, but he raised his glass of wine and looked directly at me. "To our daughter, the writer," he said, his voice steady and sure. "We are so proud of you." The words were simple, but they filled a hollow space inside me I hadn't even known was empty. He started asking me questions. Real questions. "What are you reading in that English class now? What makes a sentence good?" He listened to my answers, his brow furrowed in concentration, actually trying to understand this foreign country of literature that I inhabited. He didn't always get it, but the effort itself was a language of love I was only just beginning to learn. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after the letter arrived, he found me in my grandfather's study, scribbling in a notebook. He stood in the doorway for a moment, hesitating. "Am I interrupting?" I shook my head. "No, come in." He walked in, his large frame making the cozy room seem even smaller. He ran a hand over the spines of my grandfather's old books. "This was his sanctuary too, you know," my father said softly. "He loved poetry. Rilke. Neruda. I could never understand it. I thought it was a waste of time." He gave a sad, small smile. "I think I understand a little better now." He turned to face me. "The prize money," he said. "It's $1,000. That's a lot of money." "It is," I agreed, wondering where he was going with this. "I was thinking," he said, his voice gaining a bit of its old, decisive energy, but tempered now, thoughtful. "That money shouldn't just go into a savings account. It's a seed. For your future. Your mother and I will match it. We want you to use it for a writing program this summer. A good one. Whatever you need." I was speechless. It was more than I had ever dared to hope for. Not just the money, but the endorsement. The belief. "That is amazing. Thank you, Dad." He nodded, a look of deep satisfaction on his face. But then his expression grew serious again. "There's something else," he said. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and pulled out a small, worn, black leather notebook. I had seen it before, tucked away in his bedside drawer, but I had never known what it was. He held it out to me. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. A lot of remembering. After I read your story, I started writing things down. Things I should have said a long time ago. Things I remember about you when you were little. Things about my own father." He took a deep breath. "I'm not a writer like you. The words don't come easy. But I thought, maybe you'd like to read it someday. So you can understand. So you can know that I'm trying." I took the notebook from him. It felt warm from being in his pocket. The leather was soft and supple. This small, simple object felt heavier than the winning letter, heavier than any trophy. It was a tangible piece of his soul, offered to me as a peace offering. "I would love to read it, Dad," I whispered, my throat tight. He nodded, a look of profound relief washing over his face. He turned and left the room, leaving me alone with the notebook. I sat back in my grandfather's old leather chair, the same chair I had cried in months before. The afternoon sun streamed through the blinds, painting warm stripes across the floor. The house was quiet, filled with the peaceful, humming silence of a family healing. I could hear the faint sound of my mother watering her plants on the back porch, and the distant, happy shout of Leo playing in the yard. I opened the black notebook. The pages were filled with my father's strong, blocky handwriting, a script I knew from grocery lists and work notes. But these words were different. They were clumsy, earnest, and heartbreakingly beautiful. "My dearest Maya," the first entry began. "I watched you sleeping tonight. You are 16, but in the soft light from the hall, I could still see the tiny, fierce baby who used to grip my finger and not let go. How did I lose my grip on you?" I closed the notebook, holding it to my chest. I wasn't ready to read it all yet. Some truths are so potent they need to be absorbed slowly, in small doses. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that the story of our family was not over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one written not in the ink of judgment and fear, but in the messy, beautiful, and ultimately redeeming script of love and forgiveness. The final had indeed been changed, not by a single dramatic event, but by the slow, steady, courageous work of beginning again. Historia